But Dennis, why did you want to become a coach?
I was going to be a coach, and I was never going to be a coach like that one that told me I couldn't play. I didn't know if I could ever win a football game, but I was going to tell kids what they could do,
Mm.
not what they couldn't do. So I was going to be a coach from that day forward.
Austin, how are you?
Good, Dad. How you doing today?
Good. I'm excited. We've got a couple friends, another father-son team, and it's going to be a great time together. I can sense it. But today our journey takes us to the great state of Texas, where high school football is king. We all heard the stories about Friday night lights, but today we're going to take a look beyond the championships, beyond the awards, and inside the heart and mind of two transformational leaders, committed to building men from the inside out, coaching to change lives. My name is Ken Karcher, and I'll be your host. And alongside me today is my son, Austin, and would like to welcome Team Parker as our guest to awaken kingdom culture where hearts and minds come alive, one story at a time. Welcome, Dennis and Sam. We're glad to have you.
It's always good to be with you, Ken. Good to meet Austin, and I love my son.
You should. That's great. Well, Dennis, let's go back and start with you. And if you can, take us back to when you were growing up in the Parker home and tell us a little bit about your parents, siblings, and just growing up. Describe your childhood.
Well, I tell you a story that kind of covers it all. I was the youngest of six boys.
Wow.
My dad was a truck driver, a long haul truck driver, and my mom was the God needed an angel in Idabel, Oklahoma, so he put her there, and she raised the six boys. To be honest, and when my brothers were all athletes, I mean, my oldest brother was the winningest coach in the state of Arizona. He's in the National High School Hall of Fame, and he was a great football player. But anyway, all my brothers were. And so going into high school, I knew that I was going to be, I mean, I was a Parker. Oh, I mean, that's the way it is. And so I went to get my equipment going into my sophomore year, and the head coach, who had been somehow successful, called me over and he said, I want you to wait and talk to you at the end. And I said, okay. I figured he's going to give me some good equipment. And so I went in and he said, Dennis, I just think you're too fat to play high school football. I think that it would be uh, unhealthy for you to play the game of football. And he said, since you're a Parker, I'll give you the weekend to decide. But I just think it's against your health to do that. And so I left and I was walking home. We lived about 6 miles out in the country. We lived in a 3-room house. My mom, dad's bedroom was the living room. We had the kitchen. And then we had the back room where the six boys slept. And I start walking home, and this junior high coach, first year coach, Bob Wilmoth, pulls up beside me. And he says, you want to ride? And I didn't want to ride, but I didn't want to say no because I was afraid I'd start crying. And they already told me that I didn't want to be a baby to you. So we started home, and Bob Wilman telling me, you're going to make the most important decision of your life. And I thought, how can that be? He just told me I can't play. And he said, Coach so-and-so just told you that you're too fat to play. Well, you are. But it's no accident. You haven't accidentally eaten your mama's pie or fried chicken. It's by choice. And if you don't play football, it's got to be your decision. Don't let other people decide your life.
Mm.
And so I got home and I slept that night and I was laying in bed and I decided two things. Number one, I was going to play football,
Mm.
which really excited that head coach. And then number two, I was going to be a coach, and I was never going to tell a kid what he couldn't do.
Mm.
And I did go and I did play football and go to college and play football in college. And the story's not about how good a football player I was, because I wasn't. But it's about a coach, Bob Wilmoth, and that's why anytime anybody ever said to me, "Well, I'm just a junior high coach," I say, the most significant coach in my life was a junior high coach.
Yeah.
And every time somebody in my life would say, "You can't do that," I'd say, "Well," and that would reflect back to Bob Wilmoth and that ride back to the old home. That I had a great life growing up. I mean, I truly had the greatest life anybody could have. We had no TV set, so we had to play outside. We played outside till dark. The six boys fought every day, but we learned to love one another. The first class I ever took in college was a class on sociology, and the professor said there's two things that makes any organization great. Two. Number one, you have to have standards. And I thought back to the way I was raised. We didn't own a property. We rented. We didn't have anything. But my mama would always say, "Well, you're a Parker. You take a bath every night. You do this. You do this. You don't lie because you're a Parker." We had standards that they set. The number two things that you have to have a great organization is tradition. I I thought back, we had to wash dishes every meal until you were a senior. And when you became a senior in high school, you didn't have. So we were more excited about getting to be a senior because we didn't have to work. We had all these traditions, and I thought, my dad had a third grade education, my mom had an eighth grade education, and they understood Dr. Stevens' sociology better than most. It was a great upbringing, and I could go on forever. But they were, my brothers. One brother was the most decorated person in Vietnam from McCurtain County that was killed. He was just older than I was. I have a brother that became a judge. I have the winningest high school coach in Ashland. All of those boys came from those two parents, and it's just a matter of setting standards and having traditions, I guess. And it's what we tried to carry on with Sam and Kim. And there's nobody that has two better kids in this world than I do.
Sam, tell us about your childhood and also describe your relationship with your dad.
Wow.
Wait a minute. Before he starts, let me explain one thing to you, because I've heard this and I know it's true. The referees will come up to Sam and they'll say, Are you Dennis Parker's boy?" And he always, "Why?"
So I wish that I wish that I had. I don't wish I had a great childhood. I got to watch. Being born in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and then very quickly moving to San Antonio, and don't remember, was real young when Dad won his first state championship at Judson, and then moved to Marshall and really grew up. That was my young years, and watched Dad and was at practice every day. And so, I kind of grew up on the practice field or on the, I was sitting at a game. Ironically, I was sitting at a game before one of my games, and I was sitting on the sideline before the game, and before we went to pregame, and I was thinking to myself, I've spent my entire life either at a football game or going to a football game, and so, but Marshall getting to watch that was awesome, and then Dad going to North Texas and being a part of that, and when Dad took the job at North Texas, Mom and Kim stayed, and Dad and I went, and Dad had 5 o'clock workouts, and I was up there at 5 o'clock every morning, going through the workouts, and there was even at North Texas, there was a guy that Dad always put, whoever got hurt was in charge of picking me up from school, and would pick me up from school and bring me to the field house, and whoever it was that was hurt, it was commonplace for me to say, well, what's wrong with you, and I rolled my ankle or I did something, because that was the reason that they were picking me up, so, but that was really, really exciting and fun, and probably molded me as much as a coach then as I knew, at the time. So then fast forward, went to Cleveland. Dad went to Cleveland, graduated from Cleveland, went to the Naval Academy Prep School out of high school, then went to North Texas and played, and did everything I could not to coach, and it's such a God thing. What are you going to be? And I was like, anything but a coach. It was like when I played, right? I didn't care what I played as long as it wasn't offensive line. I didn't want to play offensive line. I've watched 100 years of Dad yelling at those fat kids. Like I do not. And so, and I did both. I ended up being a coach and a fat kid. So it ended up being, all. But went to college and was going to be a lawyer because my uncle, who was the judge, was a lawyer, and so I was going to go into law. And then I went into medicine and thought I was going to be a doctor, and God just pushed it all right back, and just ended up getting to coach at North Texas for 3 years, and just total God thing that this is where I'm at, what I'm supposed to do. Growing up was I think that of all the sociology that Dad spoke about, I think that ultimately, the same is true in our home. We had traditions and we had standards, and a lot of what I learned was by default because I watched either my sister be successful or my sister not be successful, and so I was smart enough to learn, hey, this is what you do or this is what you don't do, right? And so, but my mother was absolutely amazing and very similar to his, was an angel in our home, and was absolutely awesome about the fact that she held on to those traditions, and she made sure that even when Dad wasn't around, those traditions and those standards were always met.
Sam, was there a memorable conversation you had with your dad that sticks out to you?
There's 1,000. There's 1,000. What I do remember is there's a couple. So I was GAing in North Texas, and I was mad. GAing is a horrible, horrible job, and a funny story about that is that I was GAing, and I was upset about the fact that you make no money, you're broke, I was GAing at the time when Gene Stallings came in as the interim head coach, interim AD at North Texas, and he tossed us his keys and said, make sure it's polished, right? And so that was the job at North Texas at the time, was to go polish his car, and I was thinking to myself, this is what I'm doing. And I remember calling Dad later, and I was like, Dad, I'm done. Like I'll go be a high school coach. Like I want to be a high school coach. This is what I want to do. And he was like, Sam, just hang on. I was like, nope, not going to do it. And so I ended up taking a job. And then fast forward a year, I was teaching English and coaching at Pflugerville Hendrickson. And I called him and I said, Dad, like I'm a horrible teacher. Like I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea what's going on. And he said, well, you better figure it out. You're cheating kids if you don't figure it out. Figure that out fast. And I said, okay. I said, yes, sir. So that was memorable conversations in the fact that you better figure it out fast. So
Dennis, when you look back at your relationship with your dad, what would you say that was like? And do you have a memorable conversation with your father?
Yeah, I can remember. I can remember it like it was yesterday. My dad was a truck driver, and so I saw my dad maybe once a month. And so my dad had multiple myeloma, and he was going to die from cancer. And so that's why I took the marshal job, because that was the closest Texas school to Idabel, Oklahoma. And Dad was going to die within a couple of years. And I wanted my dad to know Sam and Kimmy. Sam's named after him. So I wanted my dad to know my son. And so we moved to Marshall. And like I said, Dad was dying of cancer. So we go down to the 10 acres that my brother had bought for my dad to play with cows and be a cowboy and so forth. And so we went down to the 10 acres, and he and I drove down there, and we got out and we were sitting on this log, and he said, "You know, Dennis, I don't guess you and I have ever had a talk, have we?" And I said, "No, sir, I don't think so." He said, "It's too late now. I'm dying. Let's go home." That was it. It's exactly what I learned from watching my dad uh, discipline. And discipline is a easy word for beat the dickens out of my older brother. But my dad was an odd person. One of my brothers could wreck the car, destroy a car, or do something, and he'd say, "Hey, I shouldn't have done that, boy." But if one of them lied to him, he'd take the gird off of a saddle or a garden hose. I mean, lying to him, there wasn't anything worse. He told me if I heard it once, I heard it 1,000 times. It don't cost nothing to tell the truth. And if you tell the truth, you're eliminating a problem.
Mm,
If you lie, you're causing another one. And,
mm.
that's a guy with a third grade education. So
Hmm.
uh, we didn't have a lot of, I learned from watching him and my brothers. My oldest brother was more of a role model than anybody. He was a great high school football player and All-American in college, and great coach. And so he was kind of my role model
Mm.
my entire life. But
Dennis, what role did faith play in your home growing up?
zero, zero. We went to church maybe on Christmas and Easter. We went to a real country church way out in the country, and the preacher he would preach every other Sunday. And we always hoped he wasn't preaching the Sunday we went, but this guy preached on two things. You wear makeup, you're going to hell. You dance, you're going to hell. Well, I didn't wear makeup, and I sure couldn't dance, so I always thought I was pretty. And it's a great lesson for all the coaches out there. When I went to Judson High School, I didn't know the Lord. I had no background. And D.W. Rutledge and I drove to Judson and back every day. We lived right by each other on the Guadalupe River. And D.W. kept saying, "Dennis, you need to go to church. You need to go to church with me." Boy, we got a great church, great preacher, blah, blah, blah. So finally I told Mary, I said, "We're going to go to church just to get him off my back. I'm tired." So we went to church, and I met George Schultz. And George Schultz introduced me to the gospel.
Hmm.
When you walked in George Schultz Church, First Baptist Church in Seguin, he'd stand out the door, not at the end of the service, but at the beginning, and he'd say, "You come in here to worship God or be recognized?"
Mm.
And why, just, well, DW invited me, I didn't, so I heard the gospel for the first time in my life, and I couldn't get enough. I went Sunday night, Wednesday night, joined the Bible study fellowship on Monday night, went Monday night, accepted Christ as my Lord when I was 33. You have three ages: a chronological age, a spiritual age, and a mental age. And your chronological, how old you been? Your spiritual age is when did you accept Christ? I accepted Christ when I was 33. So I'm
Mm.
42-year-old Christian. If
Mm.
you're 15 years old and accepted Christ when you're 13, you're a 2-year-old Christian.
Mm.
So I mean that's faith was not big until George Schultz and introducing me to Jesus Christ, and then it became my life.
Mm.
Dennis, when you got saved, or when you went to that church and then you've kept going back, what was it about the gospel that drew you to it?
The sacrifice that somebody made so I could go to heaven.
Mm.
That somebody actually paid. I had been in court a couple of times. I actually been in jail a couple. Not for anything really serious or anything, but and when you sit there and think about I've been in front of a judge and they say, okay, you're going to do this, and Jesus steps up and says, no, I got him. I got him. I got him. You don't have to send him anywhere. I got him. I'll cover for him.
Mm.
That just really amazed me.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get over it. And so, like I said, I went Sunday, Wednesday, and then Bible study fellowship. And the more I learned, the better it got.
Sam, you were talking about your dad's career and especially at Marshall. Was there a favorite coaching memory that sticks out to you?
Oh, favorite memory. I vividly remember, some of those playoff games in Texas Stadium. I vividly remember, um, ironically, the temperature of some of those games more than, being a ball boy. That was probably, and being 10, remember some of that. I remember being in North Texas and just, you have to remember going from Judson to Marshall, right? He won a state championship at Judson, and then going to Marshall. And I remember I was 4 or 5, and being in the coach's locker room, and how do we do, Dad? We we didn't win. Well, we need to go back to Judson because we always won there. And then somebody escorting me out of the coach's office, and but then old enough as I got older, watching Dad, um, you know, win a state championship at Marshall, go to North Texas, and just kind of the battle that he was struggling there, and just watching him, tirelessly uh, struggle to get that program going, and I remember being really heartbroken. Really not heartbroken. That's a bad word. I remember being really sad, because he was working so hard to build that, and then when it was taken away, that was really hard on me, and
Yeah.
for no reason. That's a very selfish. It makes it sound like it's hard on me. I remember being very sad for him that he didn't get to see the ramifications, the positive things that he was doing come to light. But then was very thankful, when he got out, and then he got to coach me, which was a real blessing because I got 4 years of him while I was at Cleburne, and so very thankful that I had that opportunity. I hated it at the time. There was never going to be a doubt that anybody said that you're playing because your dad's the coach. He made sure that was not going to be ever questioned. I remember going to the locker room, and even some of my friends, they were like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, I'm fine. I'm actually fine. But it also made it built a really strong relationship in the fact that I knew he cared, I knew he loved, and what that looked like.
Yeah. What how did your dad inspire you and then influence your faith?
I think that some of the best out there. You learn from the people that have done it before you. And I got to watch Dad go through and be a head coach, and be a Christian man, right? And be a father and be a husband. And I got to watch and see what that looks like and what that's supposed to look like. And so, I everything that he had to learn by himself. I got the cheat code, right? I got the model right in front of me as far as watching that and seeing that and really, especially in coaching, I had the formula in front of me already. So I think that, between my mother and my father, we were always a faith-based family. We were always at church, and even if Dad couldn't go, Mom was always going to take us to church, and I remember Mom sitting down and just like any other kid, we were like, Mom, do we have to go to church? Yeah, we have to go to church, and we loaded up and went to church, and especially in my high school years, it was a big part. It's always been a big part of my life. My faith has always
Yeah.
been such a huge part of my belief system. But that is, I wish that I could take any credit for that. I can't take any. My mother and father built that in us from the very, very early age. And not by force. You know what I mean? It was a force to go to church. That wasn't a question. But our faith and what we believe in was all ours.
Amen.
When the this is going to sound sad, but not maybe, the best thing that ever happened to me was getting fired at North Texas.
Mm.
And I really felt, we had taken it to that point, and we had all the starters coming back, and we had everything, we were going to win it all the next year, and everything was good and all that, and they fired me. And the first phone call I got was from Grant Teff.
Hmm.
And Grant Teff said, "Isn't this great?" Whoa, wait a minute. I ain't real sure getting fired is real great. And he said, "Yeah, it is, Dennis." He said, all the years that you sat there and spoke at all these clinics and did all those things, and you said, "I love the Lord" and all that. And everybody sat in that room and said, "Well, yeah, I would too. If I had the kids he had, and if I was, the champion and all this kind of stuff." He said, "But now
Mm.
you're going to really get a chance to witness, because people are going to call you and they're going to say, 'Boy, you got shafted because they shouldn't have fired you.' And you're going to say, 'You know what? God's got a great plan for me. This is a
Mm.
great thing.'" And if they're a Christian, they're going to say, "Yeah, that's why I called you." And if they're a non-Christian, it's going to get real silent, and you're going to have a chance to witness, probably for the first time in your life.
Wow.
The second phone call I got was from Zig Ziglar. And Zig calls and he said, "Hey, ain't this the greatest day you've ever seen in your life? Isn't this just absolutely awesome?" And I said, "Okay, help me out here, Zig." He, "You can go to work for me. You don't ever have to coach again. You can
Mm.
go to work for me, and we can publish that character curriculum." Uh, 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 Me and what was his wife's name, Mary? Uh, we'll meet with you guys tonight, you and Mary, and we'll sign a contract, and we'll get started tomorrow.
Wow.
So, and now you think about it, that curriculum would have never been written, never been published, had it not been for me getting fired. Because
Mm.
I wouldn't have written it at North Texas. Ken knows that. There wasn't the time or the focus or anything. But with Zig, it was, we're going to write a curriculum that young coaches can use to make kids better people.
Mm.
As Sam's coaching, let me tell you the best one. He has taken the curriculum that I wrote and he has improved it 1,000%.
Hmm.
Our daughter has taken the curriculum I wrote and wrote an elementary curriculum.
Wow.
So
Legacy. Wow.
yeah, and that's what it is, a legacy. I've been trying to
Well,
give it away.
let's jump to coaching, your coaching career. We've talked a little bit about it, but let's start with both you guys. But Dennis, why did you want to become a coach?
You just heard it, Bob Willis.
Mm.
You know, that riding that pickup, going home, laying in bed that night, and I said, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to play football, which was not easy because I was about 5'5", 250 pounds. I had to lose the weight, and all that stuff. But number two, I was going to be a coach, and I was never going to be a coach like that one that told me I couldn't play. I didn't know if I could ever win a football game, but I was going to tell kids what they could do, not what they couldn't do. So I was going to be a coach from that day forward.
Did you want Sam to be a coach?
No. But it's not that I didn't want him to be. I wanted him to be. My two kids, neither one of them wanted us to pay for their education. Both our kids paid their own way and did all their own things. And Sam would tell me, Dad, I'm going to be a lawyer. That's great. And his uncle Steve, the judge, was, yeah, Sam, me and you can be a Parker and and blah, 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 and all that. And I'd say, great. Sam, it's just like my dad always taught me. It don't matter what you do, just be the best at it. If you're a janitor, that's good. Just be the best janitor they got. And so that's what I really tried to teach him. And I never once said, boy, you need to coach. That was totally of his own volition. And when he told me he was wanting to get out of college, coaching and get into high school, I said, find a good head coach and learn from him. And he did.
Dennis, one of the things that in my research, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I looked up that there was a moment, and I called it a significant moment that impacted your coaching philosophy. I think it was around 1982, and you talk about the 15 minutes prior to practice that you and your staff had developed. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I tell you, I am a very intelligent person, believe it or not. And I think real logically. And what always bothered me is we had three assumptions. I assume you want to be the best player you can be. I assume you want to be on a championship team. And I assume you want to be the best person you can be. Kind of like getting on an airplane. This plane's going to San Antonio. If you don't want to go to San Antonio, get off. That same thing with us. If those three assumptions aren't true, then don't come back tomorrow. Because I can't. I got nothing to do with you. Well, number one and number two, we took care of. But that number three, we never did. If we would tell our kids, boy, you got a bad attitude, what if one of them would have held up their hand and said, what are you doing about it, Coach? What would we have said? We didn't do anything. But we were given these 30-minute after practice speeches that nobody listened to. So I said, I tell you what I will do. We'll trade. From that day forward, I never talked to our kids at the end of practice. I traded them the after practice speech for 15 minutes at the beginning in order to teach the 36 qualities of character. World of difference.
Awesome.
There's two reasons people don't teach character. There's a study that was done that 2/3 of the teachers think they ought to teach character, but none of them ever had a class in college that taught them how to teach character. But the two reasons are, number one, they say, I don't have time. Well, you're going to spend time on character. Your choice is proactive or
reactive. Yep.
Right. And number two is it costs too much money. Them curriculums cost too much money. Well, that's why the one we got's free. And that's my, I'm going to be gone. I'm 75 years old, so it's not a lot of time left. But that curriculum should live on forever. So when I'm gone, there's people using that curriculum, and there's a lot of people that use it today. Nobody does it. Sam took it and changed it real with a creative manner that makes it better than what I did.
Sam, talk to us about how kind of your story getting into coaching. I know you were a GA, but talk about maybe your story as a high school coach and kind of your journey, and then what role your dad played in that journey, and then share with us a little bit how you have made your dad's saying you made it a little more creative with the curriculum. Share what that means.
Yeah. All right. So you asked a bunch. I'll start with the kind of my history. So after North Texas, I went to Pflugerville Hendrickson, and kind of made a bad choice. And I remember calling Dad, and Dad, they don't have any idea what they're doing. And I was running the freshman. I was running the freshman off season all by myself because nobody wanted to go into the off season, and I was running boot camp with the freshmen at Pflugerville Hendrickson all by myself. And I was very frustrated, and so I called Dad, and I called Dad, and I called Dad, and I called Dad, and I'll never forget the conversation. Sam, there's a bunch of jobs out there. Go find another job. Okay. So I went to Ennis and worked for Coach Harrell at Ennis, Texas, who had won 3 state championships, and so I wanted to be a part of that. And went there for 2 years. Then I got to be the offensive coordinator at John Tyler. Was the offensive coordinator at John Tyler for 2 years. And then got my first head job at Spring High in the Houston area for 7, and then Tom Memorial for 7. I've been here for 1. But, I think that ultimately, it goes back to like the conversation we had earlier about my journey as a head coach, was about winning games, and I say that not with any pride whatsoever. And my father being in character ed for forever since then, I was very, very, very half in with the character ed, especially when I became a head coach. We taught it. We taught it like every other high school does. You teach it for 15 minutes once a week. What are you getting? Nothing. You're getting a plausible deniability in the fact that you can say, yes, we teach character ed. Are you really teaching it? Absolutely not, right? You're throwing something at the kids that is halfway. So we were successful at Spring High. We ended up going, had a good run. Went to Tom Memorial, and we're 5-4 my first year, 8-3, 10-2, 11-1. Were the first 4 years at Tom Memorial, and then hit a horrible 2-8. And during that 2-8 season is probably my, revelation as a head coach, and the fact that I was going home at night and I was telling myself all I cared about was whether or not we won or lost. That was it. And I just couldn't do it anymore. Like I told my wife, and I was like, I'm done. I'm through. Like, if this is all this is about, if this is all that we're going to do this, then I'm through, right? Because me, nor Dennis Parker, nor Nick Saban, nor Vince Lombardi can ultimately control some of the outcomes that happen in a football game, right? I mean, it cannot. There's no way. What I can control is the fact that I can do everything I can to make these kids better people, better husbands, better fathers, right? So
Yes.
during that season, during that 2-8 season, it was the 8th game of the season, me and a really, really good friend of mine took the curriculum that he wrote, and we said, how are we going to create a program where winning is the byproduct of our program? Like, I don't care.
Yeah.
And I told him, I don't care if we go 0-10, but I want to know at the end of that next year that we are going to put our heads on the pillow and know that these kids are better kids, better people. That's all I cared about, right? And again, if they fire me, then they fire me, and I go out knowing that we have done what we're supposed to do in this job. And so we did. We sat down and we took the curriculum. And he's making way too much of what we've done. All we did was we digitized it. So we we created Google Classrooms, and we created the ability for them to go on and read it online, and we created the ability for them to answer questions. We created small link groups. We call them
Yeah.
link groups, and created, small individual groups where they have to answer those questions and gives us topics, and we commit, 15 to 20 minutes every single day to that program, to, sitting them down every single day, and building those relationships and building that and teaching the stuff that we need taught. And that's 100% character ed, right? We are 100%. Winning is going to be a byproduct of who we are, and we created trust. So if you see behind me that big, acronym for trust, and that's kind of our
Yeah.
acronym for building character ed. I think at that point it changed. It makes me sad that it took 12 years into a head coaching stint for me to realize what was really important. But thankfully, I guess I found it before it was all over. So that's kind of what we've done.
Sam, why do you think, because obviously I'm a son of a coach too, and I've everything you talk about resonates with me throughout my story. Why do you think it takes a 2-8 season for us to see the value of? Because I mean, like you said, when you're 11-2, you're 10-3, or 10-2, 8-3. I mean, the character ed or spiritual content or whatever it is has always been around. But why is it, do you think, going 2-8 or 0-10 the kind of the starting point of great coaching or deeper eternal coaching?
Being very honest, I think I think it's a God thing, because during that year, the 11-1 season, we had a group of kids that was phenomenal. And then the next year, we did what every bad coach in the nation does, right? Well, we just have bad leaders. We just, we don't have the leaders on our team to be successful. Well,
Yeah.
what do we do to create them? What do we do to teach them? What do we do to build them? What do we do to build those kids up? What do we do to make them believe they could? What do we do to change their self-image? What do we do to help them believe that there's a bigger cause, right? Well, the answer is nothing. The answer is absolutely nothing. And that year, I honestly don't believe that if we'd have gone 11-1 that next year, it just had to do that year with the type of kids that I was dealing with that we had that year. That was a total God thing, in the fact that, changing my perspective on what that looked like, right? And the good and bad to my career is that I became a head coach at a 6A high school in the state of Texas at 29 years old, right? So by that time, I'd already been a head coach for 12, 13 years. I think sometimes, Dad and I talk all the time about the fact that I wish and pray that I would have known at 29 what I know at 45, right? To be able to go back and be able to say, I don't know, right? Because I think that's the biggest challenge for talking to young coaches is just to be able to say, I don't know, I have no idea, right? I don't have any, and for some reason at 29, you feel like you need to have every answer. You need to have every possible solution, and I think the vulnerability of being able to say, I don't know, I think is one of those pieces that we grow into as we get older. That then at that moment in 2018, 19, 21, was being able to say, I don't know. But what I do know is that we're going at this like full steam ahead. We're going 100% at character ed. Like, we're going to build these kids up, and there's no flaw to that, right? Like, if we end up losing games, we lose games. You know what I mean? Like, I can promise you, they're gonna walk away knowing that we cared about them, that we loved them. And again, our story is the best ever. The next year we went 6-5. The next year we went 11-1. You know what I mean? And so people are like, well, the character ed. This whole thing isn't about wins or losses. It's not about winning. You know what I mean? Like, I take that back. I'm lying. It's about winning with these kids. It has nothing to do with that ultimate scoreboard or ultimate record says. It's about winning with these kids and knowing that you can walk across the stage and know that they had 4 years of getting the best that I could provide for them as far as teaching them to be better people, and they're going to walk away with a solid foundation, knowing that we love them, that we cared about them, and that they can come back and we're going to hug them no matter what. And I think
Well,
that also
Sam,
the next piece,
it,
the next piece for our kids
it,
here, even at Tom Memorial, is getting our kids to understand the transactional versus the what is transactional love, right? Like, do I only love you because of the fact that you run fast and run the ball? You know what I mean? And really, really,
yeah,
really hard for my kids here to understand. I love you no matter what, right? Like I'm gonna absolutely crawl down the middle of you out there because I don't like what you did. But then we walk in the field house, I'm gonna give you a big hug and tell you I love you, tell you I'm proud of you, tell you I care about you, and make sure they understand. They have a hard time. For whatever reason, this generation of kids has a really hard time breaking those two pieces, what I did versus, who I am.
well, if you think, I think that's the challenge spiritually is like we sit there and we say, there's no way that God can love us. Look at my performance, right? There's no way. But all throughout the Bible, even in the Old Testament, it sit and testifies to his love for us and Jesus ultimately being the demonstration of that love, dying on that cross. So sometimes it takes a football coach to show just a little bit of that type of love, that transformational type of love, as opposed to that transactional love to point to the ultimate one who, loves in all circumstances. And once again, love doesn't always mean a hug. Sometimes love is a butt chewing or a correction or something to point you in the right direction where you can grow and to be better than you were the moment or day before.
Amen.
Dennis, what we did is we took about 4 or 5 moments or memories, however you want to look at them, that have occurred in your coaching career. And people obviously have seen it from the outside, but what we'd like you to do, and then I want Sam, if you have a view of what happened as well, give us your take on it. But I'd just like you, Dennis, to tell us what went through your mind when you had the Marshall turnaround. You told the kids you're going to throw the football.
well, the kids were fired up. I mean, they were pumped. It's the booster club you had to worry about, because hey, we were in a league in East Texas that never they ran the power I and the wing T, and
Yep.
2 passes a game meant that you were way behind and you had to try to catch up. And we come in and we've got 39 formations and we're throwing the ball 50% of the time, and everybody in East Texas called it flag football, for the first couple of years until all of a sudden we're scoring 40 points and doing the things that we did, and you got to remember Marshall. When I went to Marshall, the lady at the first booster club meeting, the lady was there, and I said, she said, you're supposed to be able to turn programs around. So tell us, what does it mean to turn a program around? And I said, well, it's simple. You beat somebody that nobody thinks you ought to. And she said, well, you're going to have 9 chances next year. That's, that's a little scary. But, and Marshall hadn't won. The last quarterback at Marshall to win a district championship was Y.A. Tittle.
Wow.
That'd been a couple of years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, most of y'all don't even know the kids don't even know who Y.A. Tittle was. But anyway,
I know of his name.
well, and he became a great friend of mine. But he lived in San Francisco, but he had a lake house there at Caddo Lake. And once we started throwing the ball and everything, he was my biggest fan. He said, "You're right." But I got to give some credit too to Hayden Fry. Hayden Fry, the first guy to tell me somebody can stop your run. They can stop your run with personnel or numbers. So you're going to have to throw the football. So you might as well be good at it and practice twice as much on it. And I said, okay. And I carried that, all the way through my coaching career. I mean, everywhere we ever went. the thing that you're talking about, Ken. One of the one memory I have of I have a bunch of memories of like you and I go to Mitch Mayer's house and recruit. But
Yeah.
I mean, I had when I got fired, I had a kid. His name was John County. I don't know if you remember John County. He was a linebacker from John Jay in San Antonio. And he came in the office and he said, Coach, do you remember the first meeting that you had with us? I said, no. He said, the very first meeting you had with us, you said that if during the time you're here, one of us accepts Jesus Christ, that you would have been a success as a head coach.
Mm.
And I said, yeah, that doesn't surprise me. And he said, well, I did. And I just want you. I said, all right, praise the
Wow.
Lord. I'm a lot better coach than I thought it was, But,
Amen.
Sam, did you have any perspective on that? How old were you when your dad started throwing the ball all over the place in Marshall?
No perspective. I wish that I did, and I've gone back and watched as much of those Marshall years as I could find on YouTube, and much of that's available. Um, you know, I don't. I wish that I did. He was 4 when he went. I was 4 when he went to Marshall. I was 10 when he won state. Um, you know, I remember a lot more. I remember some of the games at Marshall, but I remember in detail a lot of the North Texas stuff.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, to some degree, but yeah. And then obviously it's also funny because I joke with my coaching staff, because Dad and I have sat down and talked football a handful of times, and it's just it's all the same. It's just different language, right? And there's some things that we do that
Yep.
that he's like, I don't know why you do that, and or why aren't you doing this, and probably my best memories, if you ask me, at 45 years old, you've been a head coach for 16 years, favorite memories, like we've won some huge games, we've won some huge things, and Dad's come to some, but honestly, with them being able to televise all of our games and them being able to do all that, they've been able to stay home and watch a lot of that. But probably some of my favorite memories are just being able to call Dad on Saturday after and be like, hey, all right, what'd you think? Tell me what and for better or worse, right? There's some good and bad, and there's, what the hell's what's your punt returner doing, or why are you not better on special teams, but it's those conversations are probably one of my favorite moments, just because he's been able to share those moments with me as we've gone.
Dennis, how about the moment when you were coach of the year without winning the state championship? And I think you were coach of the year when you won it too. So tell us a little bit what's going through your heart there.
Well, I tell you, the crazy thing was we had gotten beat by Carter, and that dude you're talking about, Friday Night Lights.
Yep.
We're in the book, because we beat Permian that year.
Mm.
Probably it was the first time Permian had gotten beaten in a non-conference game in, I don't know, a certain period of time. And that same year, we beat Longview for the first time in 22 years. And then we go all the way to the semifinals and get to Dallas Carter, and we get beat by Dallas Carter. And they, for some reason, I don't remember what it was, but they had, for the first time, co-coaches of the year. And I always thought it was kind of racist because they made Freddie James the head coach at Carter the co-coach of the year, but they made me the other one. And I always thought, they just didn't want to give the Carter head coach the coach of the year because of all the legal problems and everything. But I don't know. I don't know. I tell you, the saddest thing about the Dallas Carter game, and I probably told Ken this, but at the banquet, the coach of the year banquet, they give the pro coach of the year to Mike Ditka and the college coach to R.C. Slocum. And then Coach James and I are up there on the desk together. And he said, you know, Dennis, what happened on that 4th and goal that we scored the touchdown to beat you guys? And I said, no. And he said, well, I didn't know what to do. We called timeout, and I didn't know what to do. Actually, I had called timeout. But, you know, we didn't know what to do, and came over there and quarterbacked. And so the kid that went and played for the New York Giants and was an all-pro, whatever, I forget his name, but he said, Coach, let us do what we did in the 9th grade. We always scored in the 9th grade. And I said, y'all just go on and do it. And I said, wait a minute. Are you telling me that the play y'all ran to beat us, you not only hadn't practiced on it all year, you didn't even know what it was? Yeah, pretty much. And we left, and Mary said, don't you ever brag about being coach of the year. But Freddie James was a good man, and he did a good job, and it was a tough game, you know, and it was a really interesting game because we had a 4th and 2 or 3 on about their 20-something yard line, and I said, okay, we run this play. You know, I knew we'd make it on 4th and 1 or whatever it was, and then I told the guy upstairs, you know, we're going to run the clock out and kick a field goal and win the game. And he said, that's good. And our tight end jumps off sides. So it ain't 4th and 1 now, it's 4th and 6. And so the guy upstairs, not God, but a guy named Tom Thrower, he said, let's go for all of it, Coach. And he said, okay. So we ran that bubble fly, hit Beckham in the end zone for the touchdown. And then they went right back down the field. They had some great kids. They had at the time they had the record for the most Division I scholarship signees. Wow. I think there were 13 kids on that team that signed Division I scholarship. So they were good, and in their situation, they probably did a much better job of coaching than people gave them credit for. But it was a great honor. You know, coaching the All-Star game was a great honor. Getting put in the East Texas Hall of Fame, you know, has been a great joy, you know, and all of those things are, you know, they're important to so many people. And really in your life, you know, when you think about it, you know, when you get to heaven, you know, I tell you, one of the greatest stories about Sam Parker. We go to watch the Oilers and the Jets play in the Astrodome because the Jets have got a kid that played guard for me at Southeast Missouri. And he calls me and says, Coach, I want you to come, you know, and I said, okay. So we went down to watch the Jets and the Oilers play in the Astrodome. And the game was over, and so Teddy said, you know, you ought to come in here in the dressing room, you know, and you can get, what was that, sack guys, Gaston Camp or
Gastineau.
Yeah, Gastineau, get his autograph or whatever. And I said, okay. And so me and Sam go back there, and you know, and I said, you don't want to get in the dressing room, and the guy says, you don't get in here. And I said, I'm on the Texas High School Board of Directors. I'm the Texas High School Coach of the Year. I'm giving my resume. The guy says, get out of here before I call security. I said, wait. I said, I know Teddy Banker. And he said, oh, well, come on in. You know. And so we're driving back to Marshall, which is about a 3-hour drive. And so we're driving back, and I think Sam's asleep. And like he said, he's 6, 7 years old. And he looks over me and he said, Dad, that locker room's just like heaven, isn't it? I said, hey, football locker room, you think it's going to be like heaven? He said, no. He said, but you were telling him all the good things you'd done. And the guy said, you can't come in unless you know Teddy Banker. We get to heaven, God's going to say you can't come in unless you know Jesus.
Wow.
I said, you
Sam,
know
well
what?
said.
I said, you know what, son? From the mouths of babes,
Mm.
I said, you have the gospel down better than probably 90% of the people in this country. So,
Well, let me ask both of you this. But we're going to get to family in a second, Austin. But you all have mentioned in different ways about the curriculum of changing lives and building character, the 36 qualities of success. Tell us a little bit more about that, Dennis and Sam, and to our listeners.
well, I tell you, necessity is the mother of invention, right? And so we were fixing to get fired at Judson. And so we knew that our problems were all character problems. Everything that was wrong with our team. We were 7-3, had a good offense, good defense, good kicking game, good weight program, good speed program, all of those things, but we had no character program. So we said, okay, we're going to develop one. And so we did. And what we found out was there's a think tank in Colorado that determined the 300 greatest leaders that have ever lived. Jesus Christ, Abraham Lincoln, Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Jackie Robinson, the 300, and you can argue with the 300, but you know who their names are, so they obviously did something. And then they said, okay, why were these 300 the greatest that ever lived? And so they come up with these qualities. And they go, they were honest, they were committed, they were purpose driven life, they were compassionate, they were great listeners. Anyway, they listed these qualities. And then the greatest thing that they determined was that every human being has these qualities.
Mm.
You've told the truth once in your life, within you is the quality of honesty.
Mm.
Has it been developed? In the Parker family, it was developed to the nth degree by Dad taking a hose and whipping you if you lied. Saying, all of these qualities need to be developed. Well, how do you develop them? Well, there's a guy named Jesus about 2,000 years ago that taught in parables. Same idea. 2%. If you hear me today, you'll remember 2% of what I say. If you write notes or answer questions about what I say, you'll remember 60 to 80. If you discuss it after you take notes, you remember 80 to 100. Well, in that concept, we said we're going to tell stories that promote the positive reason for the quality, why you need to develop it. And then we're going to give them questions to answer. And then we're going to discuss the questions. And then on Friday, we're going to evaluate how did you do this week as far as leadership, tolerance, honesty, whatever it is. If you did good, give yourself a plus. Pat yourself on the back. If you didn't, write down why you didn't and what you're going to do different next week. Now, second question. How's that going to help you 20 years from now?
Mm-hmm.
How's that quality going to make you a better husband, a better father, a better employee, better in your life? And then it's every week. You know what I'm saying? And then on Mondays, we set goals. And we learn from a health clinic that you cannot teach goals. All you can do is practice setting goals. So on Mondays, we would set goals. And as a coaching staff, we started with ours. There's 3 things we got to do to beat Churchill. Here they are. Okay. Now then, you write down 3 things you got to do this week in order for us to beat Churchill. And it may be pass an English test.
Yeah.
Whatever it might be. And they start out and they're not good at it because they never have done it. And what we always did, we started with team goals. We'd say, okay, we're going to change the language of this school. Right? change the language, coach. We speak English. No. Instead of saying have a good day, everybody on this team is going to tell everybody, make it a good day. Because have a good day means everything works good. Make a good day means it don't matter how it works, you're going to make it a good day. Like have a good marriage, you don't have a good marriage, you make it a good marriage. You don't have a good game, you make it a good game. But then on Friday, we'd say, how we do? Well, Henry and Tom didn't do it. Okay, we can do it next week, yeah. We'd say, why didn't you do it? And what are we going to do differently? And once, if we can't do that goal as a team, we can't beat Churchill. So we do a couple of the team goals so that they get to learn it. Then we start with the individual goals. And then by the end of the 36 weeks, they don't need to be told anything. They're goal-setting individuals. And, I hear from kids all the time. They'll tell me, I'm still writing my 3 goals, coach. I say, good. I had a kid just got an email from the other day, and he said, I'm coaching Little League Baseball, and I'm using this character curriculum, and he was asking me questions about stuff. And I said, you should have listened when I was talking the first time.
When did you start your character ed? What month? What right around spring ball or?
No, the day we started football.
Okay.
We started in the off season. The first week we had a week in the classroom, and in the classroom we explained to them, here's what's going to happen this year. Here's what's going to happen March the 18th, June the 19th, September the 3rd, the third playoff game, blah, 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 and all that. And we went through the 3 assumptions, right? Because I assume you want to be the best player you can be. Well, in order to do that, you've got to have a high mental age. Mental age is determined by how do you react to adversity. That's how somebody determines your mental age. So if you throw a temper tantrum when you strike out, man or boy, you're a boy. And so I've always had kids say, don't call me a boy, coach, I'm 18 years old. And I said, no, chronologically, you're 18. I'm going to say mentally, you're about 7, And so that always made them mad, but, and that's the importance of being the best player. Being a championship team is really real simple. One thing, you got to make every decision based on the good of the team. We're going to have a party Thursday night after the pep rally, and we're going to have beer, and we're going to have girls and dancing. Do you go? Well, if it's for you, yeah. If it's for the team, no, you don't. In the English test on Thursday, for the team or for you, and that's all that matters. And then we'd say, be the best person you can be, and we could tell them, well, you're going to be the best person because we're going to teach character every day. I have a question. Curiosity. Can you name anything you learned in an after practice speech?
No.
I hate it.
So Sam, give us. Obviously, you grew up in a home where your father was doing this with his teams. You've mentioned how you're doing it with your team. Just give us your viewpoint of the character program, Changing Lives.
I think it's the most important thing that I do. I think that, I think the hardest thing is convincing, not convincing. I think like we talked about earlier, the challenge is that there's so much pressure from a winning perspective for any head coach, whether that's, a 29-year-old at Spring High School or a 34-year-old at Tom Memorial, is convincing them the priority of helping kids become better people. And ultimately, right, wrong, or indifferent, that's really where this all starts. And again, when we all got in this business, it wasn't for the money. It wasn't for, anything other than to help kids, and ultimately somehow that gets forgotten really fast with, the pressures of being successful. And it doesn't change the fact that I want to win. It doesn't change the fact that, dad teaching character didn't, was a product of wanting to win. Uh, in my eyes, it changes my definition of success, right? Ultimately I can
Yes.
walk off the field on a Friday night and know that whether it went great or went bad, we're still doing everything we can to help these kids be better people. But we'll still spend 18 hours a day trying to figure out how to put the best offensive defensive scheme in place. But it's the foundation of who we are. It's the foundation of what we are. Um, I don't think that looking at it now, especially coming into Canyon Lake and starting, I think that it's been by far the best thing that we do.
Mhm. Well, let's talk about family because we know that's the most important thing in all of our lives. And Dennis, I've had obviously the pleasure of meeting your bride, Mary. Tell us about your wife and how does she make you a better man and a better coach?
Well, Mary, do you mind leaving? Mary, well, Mary is the role model for me.
Mm.
I have never heard Mary tell a lie in my life, and she is the. I heard a lady. We had to go to a funeral of one of our coaches a while back, and one of the other coach's wives says, "Mary taught me how to coach a wife,"
Mm.
and she is. She had everything. Had it wasn't getting together out to the Parkers after a game because you coached me. We never had a party after a game. It wasn't that. We were. She was social to a point of being positive. And really, that was it. She was. You couldn't ask for a mother and sacrificial. That was unbelievable. Her brother was an All American at OU, and so she was raised in that kind of family. Her dad was probably the best man I ever knew. So it was one of those things that goes down. And I do know this, or I believe, and Zig used to say it all the time. Behind every successful man, there's a very prized woman. You know, and I think that is true. I don't think you can really be successful in coaching and really enjoy coaching without that partner. And I don't see her so much as being my wife, being my partner. She was big an assistant coach was on the staff. She's even a pretty good coach for Sam. Uh, she'll ask him every once in a while, Sam, why don't y'all work on this or what?
Sam, tell us about your wife and your daughter and just what it's like or how it's been being a dad.
Yeah, no, I'm very fortunate in the fact that married my wife here in San Antonio, and at 2008, so almost 20 years, 15, 16 years, and so she's been amazing. Early on, we thought that we we got married in Ennis, John Tyler, and she kind of thought that coaching was 2 year stints, right? Because we were at Ennis for 2 years, John Tyler for 2 years, and so we went to spring. She was like, after the second year, she was like, "Well, where are we going? What's next?" Just kind of assumed, and so she has not batted an eye and has done an amazing job of helping in this process. And very similar to my mom in the fact that trying to help young coaches' wives and trying to figure out The pressures, not the I say pressures. It's more about dealing with the time restraints, time away from home, dealing with those situations more than anything else. And how to handle that the best. And she and I are always brainstorming on how to do it more efficiently, right? Doing it more uh, in a more efficient way to help coaches be at home more, and be at home and still accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. And my daughter, who is 14, she's probably been the funnest one of all this, right? Because now that she's been around me and Big Daddy, and she's tough. I mean, she's tough. When she comes home and she's like, "Man, these kids are soft," and you're like, "Oh my goodness," or that this coach has no idea, and you're like, "Baby, you do what you're told, yes sir, no sir," and you just keep moving, and it was funny this year. She was playing softball and she came home and I was like, "How was practice?" And she was like, "We didn't practice. We played tag." And being the athletic director of the school, Dad, you're gonna have to go fix this. This is broken, and yeah, baby, I'm not. Okay. She's fun, and I think one of my favorite times that nobody thinks about was COVID, right? Because COVID, I was home more during COVID than I've ever been home, right? Because we were home 24 hours a day, and she was so emphatic, like, "Dad, put it on speakerphone. I want to know what's going on." And she was in the middle of all of it, so she doesn't miss a beat. She's gonna be a freshman, so we actually moved to Canyon Lake so that she and I would be at the same school. And that part was really interesting because when we moved to Canyon Lake, before we moved to Canyon Lake, we sat in a little bitty office, and I told her, from experience, being a coach's kid, this is what you're going to experience. This is what you're going to go through. This is what they're not going to know your first name for the first 2 years. You're going to be Parker. That's about the extent of what you're going to be known as, and are you good with it? Yes, I'm good with it. So we are, that was ultimately our goal, was for her and I to be at the same high school, and for her to kind of have the same experience that I got with my father.
Awesome.
That's awesome. So let's jump to legacy, Austin, as we do our final segments here. And this is for both Dennis, you and Sam. What has been your most memorable conversation with a former player?
That's pretty easy, John County. When John County told me that, I have never forgotten that. That was, and Sam played for the University of North Texas, and they went to several bowl games when he was playing, and we went to we would go to the bowl game. I think they were all in New Orleans, weren't they, Sam? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we're at New Orleans, and we're going down Bourbon Street, okay, and I see these two kids coming towards me, and they're not kids. I mean, they're grown up adult people. And I told Mary, I said, "This may not be good." I said that one kid I kicked off the team at North Texas, and I said, the other one played linebacker. Actually, before Ken and I were there, and I may not be real because you could tell they were drinking. And so they come up, and I mean, they hug me. They cross the road to see me. They hug me, shake my hand, and I said, I got to ask you a question. I said, I was kind of nervous when I saw you because the last time I saw you, I kicked you off the team. He said, "Coach, best thing ever happened to me." I said, "Really?" He said, "When I was in high school, they would tell me, if you don't come to practice, we're going to kick you off the team and all that." And I played every year and made all state and all that. So I got recruited at North Texas, and I came here, and the coach before you would say, if you come late to practice one more time, I'm going to kick you off. And I'd come late 10 times, and I was still starting. He said, "Then you come here and you say, if you come late again, I'm going to get rid of you." And I thought, yeah, I've heard this before. And then you call me in and say, "See ya," you know. And he said, it really dawned on me that happens in life.
Mm.
He said, I'm a vice president at the bank here in Atlanta. And, I tell that story to every time one of my people that are under me come in late. I said, let me tell you about my old coach. And, if you keep coming in late, and he said, it taught me a great lesson. That was good, and of course I still see him as mayor, with uh, the they brought me the football when they won the next year. All the kids and all the coaches, except the head coach, signed it and brought it, and I had it for until a couple of years ago. And then I decided, I really that's not mine, Mitch. So I took it to him, and he and Nathan Dagley and Paul Sharp and Scott Rich, all those guys were over there. So it was an enjoyable time. With Sam, it's been interesting because Canyon Lake is close to Judson. And so the Judson kids called me and they said, Coach, you're going to go watch your son coach? And I said, yeah. And they said, okay, we're coming. I said, what do you mean you're coming? And they said, just get us a ticket and we'll all get together with you. And I said, what if I don't want to see you guys? My son's going to give you a ticket. So they came over and we had a good visit. And the bad thing, and this, Ken, as much as I do, there are no truths left. Everything is exaggerated and embellished by, you know what I mean? I mean, all the stories from the 1983 state champion team have been embedded. The 148-pound center that we had, right? He's 123 pounds now, and I mean, they're all, it's all, but it's a great time, and I love to see it. Matter of fact, I'm amazed, and I've always said this, I'm amazed at how many emails and phone calls I get. And what I get, I never get a kid call me and say, Coach, I appreciate you teaching me how to double team block.
Mm.
Saved my marriage, or gave me a promotion. They call me and they say, Coach, you remember that story you told about the, and I say, yeah. Okay, tell that to me. All right. Yeah.
Sam, how about you, Sam? Conversation with a former player.
Oh, there's been 100. So I'm very similar to to my father. So one of the things that I'm really really big about is birthdays. So I can tell you every birthday of every kid that's played for me, right? So
wow.
I still call and text them and wish them happy birthdays. And so get the opportunity to talk to those kids, at least once a year, every day, every year. But it's very similar to Dad in the fact that not once has one of those kids called and said, hey, do you remember us beating Klein Oak in the playoffs, or do you remember beating Lake Travis, or those big games? They always talk about the experience that they had in high school, the things they learned in high school. I had a kid a few years ago that had run away from home. His girlfriend, he just found out his girlfriend was pregnant. And so we kind of caught him on the back end, but still comes to this day and hugs me and Dara and the family are really close. My wife and the family are really close, and they always claim how much we did. We just loved the kid like he's supposed to be loved, right? We just loved the kid, the way that it was supposed to happen, and so. I think that one of the things that I love about this job is and hate about the job is just the enormous responsibility that you hold with every moment that you're in front of kids. Is a moment that you have an opportunity to help that situation. And I think that there's back to the very beginning of this conversation with my father teaching me you better learn fast. Well, it's always you better learn fast because again, otherwise you're cheating kids. I that's ingrained in my head because every single time I stand in front of a group of kids or a group of parents or a group of anybody, I think the last thing I say to myself is you better learn fast, right? Because there's no cheating kids. Like you don't get another opportunity to do this moment. So.
What has been the most significant thing you've learned from your dad's journey of faith as a coach, Sam?
To not lose it. I think that more than anything, like there's going to be good and bad, right? Like more than anything else, I'm in my office at school right now, and I have a rock that I made, in Easter one year that just says forgiven, and it goes back to that transactional versus transformational, right? Like there's nothing that I can do. There's nothing that these kids can do. There's nothing that, I'm going to fail. I'm going to fail miserably every day, right? I'm going to absolutely, and so are they. But ultimately, my job is to give my life to Him and to keep trusting that I am forgiven, that I was forgiven the day that I was born. I was forgiven before it ever happened, right? And ultimately making sure that piece stays solid throughout my journey, and it continues to be my journey.
Amen.
So let me ask both of you this question: is if you were able to sit on with coaches around America for 10 minutes, what would you tell them about the real opportunity they have beyond winning and losing?
Well, I tell you, you've already said it. You or Austin said, well, you got to make a decision if you want to be a transformational coach or if you want to be a transactional coach.
Mm.
Transactional means the scoreboard's all that matters. The scoreboard is all that matters to anybody. Transformational means that the scoreboard is a byproduct. And what the product is good kids, good people, great leaders, things like that. A guy asked me one time which was the best team you ever coached, and I said, I don't know. Give me 20 years.
Yep.
Let me know 20 years from now what those kids are doing. We had a reunion, or they had a reunion of that '88 football team because it's still the only undefeated team in the history of Marshall. And because Carter had to forfeit to us, after all the legal stuff. And this kid got up and they were giving their favorite memories, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's 46, 48 kids there, I mean, and there's only 3 kids that didn't show up, and this kid gets up and he says, Coach Parker, I just want you to know, ain't none of us divorced, you know. And I go, so, and he said, if we heard that one time, we heard it 1,000 times. You don't ever quit.
Mm.
That's what you said, about you and your wife. You just didn't ever get a divorce, and that she had been real mean to you, and you still didn't quit. You don't bring that up. But,
Sam, what would you share?
The exact same thing. I would ask them why they're I would ask important questions. Why are you doing this? You're not doing this for the money. You're not doing this. Ultimately, are you doing this for you, or are you doing this for the people that you're going to change their lives, right? Because ultimately, the transformational is an easy way of relaying that. The other thing that I would tell them is that you're probably not going to figure this out for another 15 years. And when you figure it out, it's going to be like a light bulb that hits you in the face. But it's so sad, that it takes that to figure it out. But ultimately, that what do you want your legacy to be? Is your legacy going to be about wins and losses, or is your legacy going to be the lives that you change in the process?
Hmm. Well, the final thing we do, guys, is we call it final words or words of life from you to each other. So we want to give you a minute here or so, Dennis, to share final words, anything you want to share with your son, Sam, and Sam, anything you want to say back to your dad. Then Austin will follow, and I'll close us.
Well, I'll say Sam and Kimmy and I, every Sunday, we have a book. We're reading a book together, and we've read 5 or 6 books. And every Sunday, that's what we have, a book that we read and we talk about. And I think we pretty much cover, we spend 10 minutes on the book, and we spend, an hour talking to each other and so forth. But, we learn some lessons from the book, that's for sure. But what we really learn is, that the love we have for each other and how important each one of us is to the other one, and how important Kimmy's job is to Sam, and how important Sam's job is to Mary, and how important they are to us. And it's just, an every Sunday thing. And I think the greatest thing I can say is I'm never going to have to be like my dad and sit Sam down on a log and say, Sam, I don't guess we ever had a talk, because we talk every Sunday, and we talk more than that, but I mean, every Sunday is an hour. So, that's kind of always been my goal. I don't want to end up like my dad did, because I think that was a tough day for him, just like me.
Thanks, Dennis. Sam, words to your dad?
Yeah, I would, I think that very similar to what he just said. We talk every Sunday, I think the podcast, the real interesting podcast, would be recording those Sunday conversations sometimes, because sometimes there's the I don't agree and the I do agree, or those. But I think more than anything, I would say to my dad, thank you, right? Like he was the rock for our family. He was the mentor for me. He was the one that I've learned the most from, as far as how to be a father, how to be a Christian, how to be a man, right? And he's been that for so many young men, right? So many people, so many lives, and to have that as my father has been, is I feel very, very, very thankful, very grateful, very appreciative, I think that's not something that's common, right? I don't think that it's common that people have that anymore, and I don't take that for granted. I don't take that at all. So I appreciate what he's done for me.
Well, so you talking about the podcast, the interesting one would be on Sundays. That's kind of how this thing birthed itself. I mean, just like you talk with your dad and stuff like that. Dad and I have forever had our phone calls after a practice or a game, or on the way home from a place, or it's just, and like you said, that's where real life tends to happen, and you get deep with people, and just sitting here listening, I've been blessed to hear both y'all's hearts today. And Sam, for me, you're extremely deep, and it's really cool what God's doing in your life and the role that you play in the people around you, which then speaks to you, Dennis. I mean, to me, one of the greatest legacy, I don't know, like even when you think about God, his son was what came and showed what the Father was about to the earth. And so, one of the things being a son of a coach is I always wanted to represent my dad well, and kind of show the principles that he's taught, and tried to bring out of other people, but ultimately me being his son, even more so about the Father's heart. And Sam, it's your life, just sitting and listening and to your depth and what God's showing you speaks to how much you, Coach Parker, have done as a father, loving your son and your daughter, and then your kids throughout these years. I mean, we're the ones that watch so closely. We sit and we watch not only the wins but also the losses, and your life is the best testimony of them all, not just what you say, but how you live it. And so, it's been a pleasure to sit and hear y'all's story and seeing how God has made or has focused your work on being transformational as opposed to transactional.
Amen.
Sam, go ahead, Dennis.
No, I just said amen.
Oh, okay. Well, Sam, there's two words that jump out at me when I think of you now, because again, I remember you as that little kid at North Texas. And I was excited to have this opportunity. But I see genuine and humility in who you are. And what two great qualities there could be for a coach. I think of all the coaches I've had in my life, both as a player and then as a coach working with, and those qualities are someone that I would want to be coached by myself. And I know your dad is proud of you for many things, but just sitting here today, the man that you are, those young boys and people within that school are blessed to have you be someone that cares for them. So thank you for being humble and genuine and sharing life with us today. And Dennis, I got to start with, I've told you many times your face, but I told Austin this, and Pauline remembers that. I mean, you gave me my first job in college football. You took a chance on a former player, and you gave me an opportunity. And unfortunately, we only got to spend one short year together. But I have followed you, as you know, for your whole entire life. And what I can say about you, you are who you say you are. Every environment that I've seen you in, you've been Dennis Parker, and you've had a genuine love for those kids that you've coached and the coaches that you've worked with. So I say thank you for having me be part of your story, and we are just excited to have spent time with you today. So Austin, I'd want to thank both of you for allowing us to share your story with our listeners at Awaken Kingdom Culture, where hearts and minds come alive, one story at a time.